Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video where we're going to cover the best NBA free agents in 2023. We are so close to the NBA Finals. I'm really excited with how the series have progressed. A lot of shockers. I think the Miami Heat, of course, at the forefront of that, and it really excites me going into this offseason, talking about how teams could potentially progress. And we're going to look at some of the most proven free agents in this year's free agency class. Make sure to leave a like on today's video if you do enjoy. Subscribe to the channel as well. It just lets me know I'm doing a good job and that you are enjoying all of the hard work that goes into the daily uploads on the channel. And for a video preview, nice and easy, we're just talking about the 20 best NBA free agents this offseason. This is a loose ranking I made. Now, I didn't sit down and analyze every single little thing. I didn't want to put in that much in terms of, hey, this guy's this much better because this is kind of a generic top 20. There's going to be some players that are not included in this that you might think, well, that's interesting. An example of that is Kelly Oubre, who I just do not think is a top 20 free agent this offseason. I think that there's players out there who are better than them. This video will have restricted free agents in it. It has a lot of unrestricted free agents as well. So it is a pretty interesting video. Now, I know some of you have seen this video on the channel, all 202 NBA free agents. If you have not, I really recommend that out if you are an NBA sicko like I am. That video talks about every single free agent out there, every single free agent imaginable this offseason and what they could potentially have happen. It looks at restricteds, unrestricteds, minimums, mid-levels. It also looks at a bunch of two-way players as well. So it's a really long video. It's a really exciting video. I know not everybody's a sicko like I am, so this is the point of today's video. Plus, I think it's a good focus on just some of the top end guys for a video like this. But if you do want to go check that out, I'll put a card for it here so that you can actually watch this video, because I do think that the work that went into that one was immense. It's one of my favorite videos actually on the channel from this offseason cycle so far. So I'm really excited to get into this one though. So let's jump into it now. With number 20, my 20th ranked free agent this offseason is Nikola Vucevic. And now that might be a little surprising to some people. Vucevic, obviously a talented big who can step out behind the three-point line, knock it down. He's a pretty solid passer. I think the one thing with Vucevic, though, is his best days are, in fact, behind him. I think, you know, he was in his prime in Orlando, and then the Chicago Bulls executed the trade for him. Of course, kind of shaped them up to have a big offseason that year when they brought in Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso. I think if they don't get Vucevic, we might not see that type of movement from them that offseason. But to be honest, you look at the actual results of that trade, and it was a massive bust for the Chicago Bulls. Vucevic, they traded 2 firsts to get him. I knew it was terrible the moment that they executed that. And Vucevic, just, they haven't even won a playoff series with him. They missed the playoffs this year, even though he played all 82 games. I think he's a solid player, but the issue is he too talented to get on a good contract, something around, you know, $15 to $16 million? Is he going to be looking for $20+ million a year? To me, I just don't really see value in giving him that, because he doesn't protect the rim at the level of, you know, some other bigs in this league. He doesn't switch out in space. He's not going to play at the level of the screen very well. I think that there's some real drop-offs for him, but also just the talent level is there. If you get him on a team-friendly deal, he can have a nice positive impact for you as a scoring big, something we don't see a lot of today outside of the top-end guys, the Nikola Jokic's, the Joel Embiid's of the world. Vucevic still has that talent to him. He can knock down jump shots for sure, but for me, he's a player I would stray away from. I have a feeling that my Dallas Mavericks are going to strongly pursue him. We are going to talk about some potential landing spots for these guys as well. If it's not Chicago, I think Dallas probably is considered the front runner right now to land Nikola Vucevic, which again, I think is a nightmare. The Mavericks don't need a Nikola Vucevic. They need someone who's athletic and protect the rim and rebound. Vucevic does rebound the ball fairly well, but I think that they need someone who kind of jumps out of the gym a little bit more than what Vucevic brings. So because of that, I don't want my Mavs to sign him, but I do think that there is still some value in him around the league. Number 19, Harrison Barnes. I have him as the 19th best free agent, and I know some people are going to say, whoa, you have Barnes above Kelly Oubre. Yeah, I think Harrison Barnes impacts winning a little bit more than Kelly Oubre does. Kelly Oubre to me is an empty calories number, empty calories, empty numbers kind of guy. You just look at, you know, he just had his best season ever, and the Hornets were, what, the 4th worst team in the league? Like, I don't know. I'm just not going to buy in on Kelly Oubre. Harrison Barnes, on the other hand, he had a really nice productive year for Sacramento. Of course, people are going to look at some of the playoff deficiencies and missing a game-winning shot. For the most part, Harrison Barnes was pretty good. for the Kings for a decent amount of that series. You think about how well he finished in transition specifically. I think his athleticism was something that was still tough for Golden State to match up with, which is a testament to Harrison Barnes, not only his conditioning, but also just his talent level, the fact that he's been able to maintain his body and still use that athleticism that made him at one point a top 10 recruit and a top 10 draft pick. And now at this point, he's still pretty bouncy, pretty athletic, but I think his game has settled down as well. He's got a pretty nice post fade and can do some things for you in the mid post that a lot of other wings just typically do not. I think he's a nice ancillary player. Now, I would be surprised if he's playing anywhere next year other than Sacramento. At this point, I just feel like Sacramento is going to try and keep their guys, which they should. And to me, Harrison Barnes probably sticks in Sac, which is a really good thing for them. I think he probably gets anywhere around 4 years, 64, around the $16 million mark a year is pretty fair for Harrison Barnes at this point of his career, in my opinion. Pick number 18, not pick number 18. My NBA mock drafts just came out in my brain. Jeremy Grant is the 18th best free agent in my eyes. I know this is going to feel really low for some people. I'm terrified that the Portland Trailblazers are about to way overpay this guy. Jeremy Grant, a little bit more of that empty calories as well. You look at the teams he's been on, there hasn't been a lot of significant winning because of him. And to be honest, you look at, his time in Denver, people are going to point to that as the time he was winning. I mean, the Denver Nuggets are doing pretty well without him. They moved off of Jeremy Grant, and it didn't really hurt them that much. They didn't really take a big step back, and when they did, it was because Jamal Murray didn't have an ACL anymore. Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, those are all players who are significantly better than Jeremy Grant, and we're going to be way more key long-term for them in Denver anyway. Now, Grant's not a bad player. Again, he's in my top 20 free agents this offseason in a list of over 200 free agents. That means he's in the top 10% of free agents here. So even though I'm ragging on him a little bit, there's still things he can give you. He's got the physical frame. He's got the athleticism. He can block some shots. He does not rebound the ball very well, but he does make some open jump shots, and he can slash and get to the rim. He's going to have a game a year where he scores 40-plus points. Everyone's like, oh, my gosh, Jeremy Grant. Outside of that, though, you turn on the tape, you're like, okay, it's Jeremy Grant. Like, I don't know. I think that he realistically stays in Portland. I think it's going to be on a massive overpay. I think the Blazers have a really, really tough offseason ahead of them because they have to make some really pivotal decisions. Pick number 3 being one of them, Jeremy Grant being another. And to be honest, if they answer wrong on both of them, it could really put them in NBA purgatory for a long, long, long time. But Jeremy Grant probably stays in Portland this offseason. Number 17, I have Jordan Clarkson, who had a fantastic year for himself. Shout out to my Utah Jazz fans watching this video, because Clarkson deserves a lot of praise, and I haven't really heard the national media give him very much. For moving into the starting lineup, he had a very productive season for himself. When you hear people talking about the Utah Jazz, typically it's around Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler. I know I've been guilty of this as well a little bit. Now, obviously, those are the long-term pieces. Those are the guys that people are excited about. Hey, Lauri Markkanen just had a huge breakout year. Walker Kessler looked fantastic as a rookie. Of course, there's the excitement, the buzz around those guys. But Clarkson's coming off the best season of his career as a starter, and I think really proved to a lot of people that maybe he is a starting level player instead of just a, kind of a hot type, can get going and be a microwave scorer off the bench. I think Clarkson proved that, hey, not only can I be good, I can be really good as a starter, scoring over 20 points a game. Now, over 50 players this year did score over 20 points a game, so it's not the same as it was 5-6 years ago. 20-point per game score is a little watered down right now, but still, someone's got to put the ball in the hoop, especially with how prolific offenses are right now. You have to keep up with other teams, and Jordan Clarkson really at the center of that as a top-end scorer who could probably get you a lot of buckets in free agency if there's a market for him, which I expect there to be. It'll probably be anywhere from $13 to $18 million a year, which is a really good payday for him. I'm very happy to see him. Now, hopefully he doesn't square up with any GMs or executives like he does with some players from time to time. Utah, I know that their ownership group really loves him. I think that they would like to have him back, but I do think there's going to be significant pull around the league for his services, and there's going to be a lot of teams interested in acquiring him. 16th, I have Brook Lopez, and this is going to be surprising as well. He is 35 years old, but he did just finish second in Defensive Player of the Year. And if you're looking for a drop coverage big in today's NBA, Brook Lopez is probably the second best in the league in that regard. I think Rudy Gobert still tops him as the best drop coverage big in the NBA, but there's a lot of other good ones out there as well. Walker Kessler, like I mentioned, was developing into that. Mitch Robinson does a pretty nice job. There's a good number of players, okay? But Brook Lopez, you look at the way that he played this season, he contested the most shots in the NBA. The expected field goal percentage was significantly negative, which means not only is he contesting, but he's doing a great job contesting. His length clearly is bothering people. He had multiple 5, 6, 7 block games this year for the Milwaukee Bucks. And of course, you know, it's tough to see the season end the way that it did for Milwaukee. I think they made a rather rash decision firing Mike Budenholzer, especially with some of the personal stuff he had going on in his life. It almost felt like there was no taste or class in that organization, to be honest. But nonetheless, Brook Lopez here out in free agency. We're going to talk about another Milwaukee Buck here in a little bit as well. But to me, I think Brook Lopez does make quite a bit of sense as a player to stay in Milwaukee. His three-point shooting is valuable. We'll probably see him around the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. Something around $12 million annually will likely get the deal done for him. So maybe you look at a 3-year, $38 million deal, because that number can escalate, obviously, going into future years. Essentially signing something similar to what PJ Tucker signed last offseason with the Philadelphia 76ers. Tucker a couple of years older than Brook Lopez as well. I think Lopez's game is going to age decently well. Now, at some point, there might be a moment where he has to move to the bench and be kind of more of a backup big. That's not a problem because Milwaukee still does have Bobby Portis as well. Maybe they could play around with their lineup a little bit, but I think Brook Lopez returns to the Bucks on a pretty friendly deal. Number 15, I have Jakob Poeltl here, who I think at his peak maybe isn't as good as Brook Lopez, especially defensively. Now, Poeltl is good defensively, don't get me wrong. He's another good drop coverage big. He doesn't block as many shots. He's not quite as good of a challenger around the rim, but he's not bad in either of those regards. One thing Jakob Poeltl does very, very well is he boxes out very well, and I think he keeps guys off the offensive glass at a really high rate, which to me is impressive and important for the Toronto Raptors, who this is code red right now for Toronto if they were to let Jakob Poeltl leave in free agency, because they still owe their 2024 first for him. They also traded their 2023 second rounder in that deal to San Antonio, who obviously San Antonio is pretty happy about the end result because they upgraded from Poeltl to Wembanyama. But nonetheless, the Raptors here are in a spot where they have to maintain Jakob Poeltl. They have to re-sign him, and it might come at an overpay. They might have to pay him $17-18 million a year, which I think is a little rich. For me, what I'd be comfortable paying him is $15-ish million, because the big man spot, as soon as you overpay, it just feels like a massive loss. And just the way that you build your team, it's hard to build around a center like Jakob Poeltl, who is not a main scorer, not a guy who's going to give you a ton on offense. It's not that he's a bad offensive player. He's a really good screen setter. He rolls downhill hard. He cleans off the offensive glass decently well. Centers are valuable. It's just you have to get them on the right price point for it to really make a lot of sense. And if I was Jakob Poeltl's agent, I would tell Toronto I'm not signing for anything less than $18 million a year, because it's possible that maybe out in free agency, a team like Houston or some of the other teams with cap space could look at Jakob Poeltl as a nice addition to their team and pay him handsomely. And because of that, I think there's some pressure on Toronto. I think Jakob Poeltl is going to get taken care of this offseason financially, and I think it's going to be probably the biggest contract he ever signs in his career. So kudos to Jakob Poeltl for really developing from where he was when the Raptors initially drafted him. Of course, his time in San Antonio felt like he improved significantly, and now he's at a spot where he's going to get paid, and it's pretty well deserved as well. Number 14, Grant Williams, which this is interesting. I know some people are going to have huge issues with me saying Grant Williams over Jakob Poeltl here. And listen, Grant Williams is a restricted free agent. One of the most mind-boggling things for me this year was Joe Mazzulla kind of moving off of Grant Williams in favor of others, whether that was Peyton Pritchard at times or a few other players on the Boston Celtics. It just felt like Grant Williams' role and minutes were so inconsistent this year. And if you've ever played any level of organized basketball, you know that if your coach doesn't 100% believe in you and you're not getting consistent minutes and you're not sure exactly what your role is supposed to be, and you're not really sure if the team has long-term plans for you, it does make it harder to actually play and succeed. I think Grant Williams has had a really nice early part of his career. I think he's a player that in free agency is going to get over $13-14 million and realistically should. I think that the front runner to land Grant Williams should be considered to be the Utah Jazz, because Danny Ainge, the lead decision maker there now for Utah, is the person who drafted Grant Williams and believes in him. I think Brad Stevens still believes in Grant Williams as well, but it's just clear Joe Mazzulla does that a little bit less than others. And another team to watch for Grant Williams would be maybe the Houston Rockets, because Ime Udoka is now the head coach there in Houston. Of course, Grant Williams kind of had a nice big breakout year last year with Ime Udoka as his head coach. And I think that would be an interesting get for the Houston Rockets, who need some players who are of the mindset of Grant Williams defensively, and also just the ability to knock down some perimeter shots. He's had some really big games in his career. To me, I would prefer signing Grant Williams over Jakob Poeltl, and the reason why, even though Jakob Poeltl, you could argue, is a better player, Grant Williams is at a more premium position. Skilled forwards who can knock down shots and defend across multiple positions, those are pretty rare and few and far between in this league. So because of that, these players get an added bump in my eyes for their value and what they can bring to a team. And Grant Williams, the guy who's relatively young still as well, I think is going to have a really strong market this offseason and is going to get paid pretty decently as well. 13th, Josh Hart here, and I love Josh Hart. Josh Hart's one of my favorite players to watch in the league because this guy brings it every single night. He's probably the best rebounding wing in the entire league, which you might say, well, that doesn't matter. Yes, it does, because it really adds to extra points. If you crash the boards and grab offensive rebounds, you're creating extra opportunities for your team, and that helps your team put more points on the board. We saw that with the New York Knicks after they acquired him from the Portland Trailblazers. That was a home run trade for the Knicks at giving up what is now pick 23 for Josh Hart. He was a fantastic addition for them, was pivotal for them advancing in the postseason as well. Kind of brings some of that swagger, that physical toughness that we are starting to equate to New York Knicks basketball, which is a really good thing. It's great that they actually have an identity now, and it's not just, we're just chasing stars every single year. They're in a position to add a star if one becomes available, but Josh Hart was a fantastic addition. He's a fantastic player for this team, and I'd be shocked if he's not back. He has a player option. He's going to 100% decline it, because if he did accept it, it would become non-guaranteed, which is a very unique situation. Typically, we don't see a lot of contracts structured that way, but Hart's is structured that way, so he will opt out, and then he will get a pretty nice payday with the New York Knicks on what is essentially a contract renegotiation with the team. I'd be surprised if he even takes free agency visits, honestly. I think it's going to be a done deal. I think the Knicks had a plan of, hey, we're trading for you and we're going to take care of you, with a little wink wink under the table handshake agreement, that Josh Hart is going to stay with the New York Knicks long term. Number 12, Dillon Brooks. And Brooks would have been significantly higher on this list had I made this list prior to the postseason, but Dillon Brooks essentially shot himself in the foot with the way that he performed in the playoffs. Not only was his offense abysmal, which it always has been. I've never been high on Dillon Brooks individually myself. I've always looked at him as a guy who can shoot you out of games and doesn't really know that he's not a shooter. And I think the big thing that stands out to me last year was against the Warriors in the second round to get to the conference finals to face the Dallas Mavericks. Dillon Brooks was having a fantastic game for himself, but he just doesn't really have a shutoff switch when he should. And down the stretch of a pivotal game, he dribbled the ball off of his foot and missed 2 mid-range jump shots, all in a span of 3 possessions. That ended up becoming, I believe, an 8-0 run for the Golden State Warriors, which really shifted the momentum of that game. The Warriors went on to win that game, and then the following game and win the series. And Dillon Brooks, to me, that's always been an issue with him. But the one thing you have to say is this guy is an all NBA defense type of player. He received those honors this year, and it was very well received, and it should be. He deserved that award. He's a very good defender, and that's why he still is in the top 12 for me, because I do think even when he's shooting you out of games and has some negative impact offensively, his defensive impact is so important that you could justify him being on the court. Now, I think a coach should have a tight leash with him and should really explain, hey, this is your role, and if you're not going to play in it, you need to adjust the way you're going to play. Otherwise, you're going to play less. And coaches need to hold that over him a little bit to get the best Dillon Brooks possible. But, and I don't think Taylor Jenkins did that. But if you're a team like Houston, or if you're another team trying to build some type of defensive identity, someone who is a dog on that end of the floor like Dillon Brooks, I think would be a fantastic addition. I expect him to get anywhere around the mid-level exception, $12.22 million a year. Before that, I was expecting him to get $16, $17, $18 million. I think that number is significantly lower now, just based off the narrative around him and some of the woes in the postseason. Not only offensively, but defensively just was less impactful too. Because I think the whole media and the narrative stuff got around him, and I think it really did impact his play For the most part, though, I still think Dillon Brooks would be a really nice addition for a team. And if there's a team out there that would go get him, there's a few that I think make a lot of sense. My top three right now would be the Dallas Mavericks, the Cleveland Cavaliers on that mid-level, and then also the Houston Rockets, trying to build some type of defensive identity going forward. 11, I have Russell Westbrook here, and this is a player who I still think is really good. I think Russell Westbrook's a fantastic player still at this point. And if it's just purely from a how good is this player, I would rank him significantly higher on this list. But I think as a free agent, it's a little bit of a different discussion because I think his fit in other teams is a lot cloudier. And I think, there's teams that just instantly you're not going to consider him going there. Atlanta, Boston, I just don't think any of those are possibilities. Charlotte with LaMelo Ball, you could go through a list. Detroit's not going to do it. There's a lot of teams that would have zero interest in Russell Westbrook just based on his play style, his age, and kind of the expectations that come with him being on your roster. There are two teams, though, that I do think make a lot of sense that would love to have him. The Clippers would love to have him back, and I think the Chicago Bulls would even more so love to add him. You look at Chicago, their entire situation around Lonzo Ball, it's been a disaster for them, unfortunately. I feel bad because I feel like that was one of the smart moves that they made, and it just hasn't panned out because of injuries. You look at how good that Bulls team was prior to Lonzo's injury, and it's just a night and day story, right? They're completely different. I think Russell Westbrook, his ability to push the tempo in transition would get Chicago a little bit closer back to being that team that was really electric and pushing the ball up and down the floor and being really fun to watch. Now, Russ doesn't do some of the things Lonzo does in terms of being a hit-ahead passer in transition. Russ likes to dribble the ball up more and push with his own speed and pace, but I still think that there's benefits there for Chicago, and you also consider the fact that Billy Donovan, former head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder and head coach when Russell Westbrook won MVP, is now the coach of the Chicago Bulls. I think that relationship goes a long way in ultimately landing Russ with the Chicago Bulls this offseason. Number 10, Khris Middleton, and this one might feel a little bit low for Middleton. Middleton's still a player I like. I think that he can have an impact for sure. The big thing around him right now is health and dedication to the game. I remember back when COVID first hit and the season got shut down, Khris Middleton went 3 months without touching a basketball, and that's a concern for me, especially as a guy ages. There's some players in the league who love basketball because they love it, and there's some people who love basketball because it gives them a paycheck. And I'm not suggesting that Khris Middleton's one of those guys that's only doing it for a paycheck, but I couldn't imagine going 3 months of my life without touching a basketball. That's just not the way that I'm wired. I'm obviously not as good of a player as Khris Middleton. Otherwise, I'd be in the NBA. But to me, that it is just a little bit of a red flag for when a guy's aging. What's that going to look like? And we've already seen some injury issues with him now that really kind of derailed his season this year with Milwaukee. Of course, missed the series last year against the Boston Celtics because of an injury. I don't want to hold that over his head. He's still a good player. Remember, he's in the top 5% of all free agents here for me. Being a top 10 free agent is fantastic because it means you're about to get paid. I think Milwaukee is going to keep him as well, just like they're going to do with Brook Lopez. But I wouldn't be shocked if there's some type of sign and trade discussion. And ultimately, if he were to be signed and traded, the team that makes the most sense is probably the Dallas Mavericks. Again, I've talked about them for a number of teams because they're star hungry. They're going to chase a lot of the top end players instead of actually building an actual roster. But Khris Middleton, I think a solid player that can still help teams. I would just be worried about giving him a 4 or 5 year deal, honestly. Number 9, Cam Johnson, restricted free agent for the Brooklyn Nets, a player who I think a lot of people expected to see on this list. He's a very, very good wing who knocks down the three-point shot at an exceptional rate. He's a fantastic shooter. When he was drafted out of North Carolina, that was really the main pull for him, was he could shoot the basketball and he's got decent size. He has developed as well in a few different areas. He's a little bit more capable with the ball in his hands now than he was a couple of years ago. Now, he didn't take a Mikal Bridges type jump when they went to Brooklyn, but I still think that was an opportunity for him to showcase his skill set a little bit more. For me, Cam Johnson's like a plus end role player. I don't think that he has that Mikal Bridges jump in him. I just would be shocked to see that, really, with the way that he plays, but that's okay. And a lot of teams, if you're planning on Cam Johnson being a build-around player and being like a go-to scorer, you're not going to win very many games. But what you are going to do is if you get Cam Johnson, expect him to be your 4th or 5th best player and knock down open shots and defend well and attack closeouts. And I think he's got surprising athleticism to him when you watch. I think he's a really nice pickup for a team. I think a lot of teams around the league would love to have him, but ultimately I'd be surprised if Brooklyn doesn't match an offer sheet for him, and I expect him to be on the Brooklyn Nets next season. Number 8, Austin Reaves, and this is one of the interesting discussion points in this video. Austin Reaves, probably one of the most surprising names on this list from where we were about 2 years ago. I just didn't expect Austin Reaves to be as good of a player as he's been so far in his young career. And I think he's going to make a lot of money this offseason. You look at the series against the Memphis Grizzlies where he at times carried the Lakers offense. You look at the series in round 2 against Golden State. I think Austin Reaves was a really advantageous player for them as well in that series. And you could make a really strong argument that he's been the 3rd best player on the Lakers since the NBA trade deadline. And I don't even really think that's pushing anything. I don't think that there's a lot of discussion against that even, really. So Austin Reaves, to me, the 8th best free agent. I know that seems a little high. Some people are going to maybe take exception to me having him above Cam Johnson. I think that there's an argument there. But Austin Reaves does more stuff with the ball in his hands. I think he's a better playmaker than Cam Johnson. He's more capable in the pick and roll. And if I was a team out there in free agency with some cap space, I would look at signing him to an offer sheet, one that's pretty competitive and puts the Lakers in a tough spot where, hey, this is their 3rd best player. They might have to try and match anything to keep him. And you can essentially tie the Lakers' hands together by having to pay Austin Reaves and get them really close up to the luxury tax and maybe even that second tax apron if you pay Reaves enough. And they're going to have a tough decision on their hands. Remember, a few years ago, the Lakers let Alex Caruso walk in free agency, which I thought was a big surprise then. I don't think they're going to operate the same way here with Reaves. I think that they're going to try their hardest to keep him in Los Angeles. He's been such a good find for them in that organization. They need him there. So I'd be shocked if they let him leave. But if I was a team, I'd be very interested in trying to acquire Austin Reaves and his services, because I think in an on-ball role, he's capable of better statistics than what he's currently putting up for the Lakers, because he'd have higher volume, higher usage, and I do think a team could be semi-productive with that being the case on their roster. He's a good addition. He's got the size to defend. He's athletic, quick. He's just a good player. Austin Reaves is fantastic. 7th, Gary Trent Jr., who is perennially a guy who's in that steals leader candidacy, and a guy who defensively I think is very intriguing for a lot of different teams. I like Gary Trent Jr. a lot. I think he's very reach happy right now. I think Nick Nurse wanted the Raptors to play that way. Out of all the things Nick Nurse did in Toronto, that's one of the few things I maybe would have adjusted myself as a coach, is I don't think I would want my team to be as reach happy. Now, I know that he was trying to generate some offensive looks because this Raptors team offensively just didn't have a lot of spacing, didn't have a lot of shooting. So he's trying to find a workaround to building like a decent offense by getting some runouts and easy layups and stuff like that. But I think Gary Trent Jr., if he does get to a spot where he stops using his hands a little bit and relies a little bit more on his feet, he's got the skill set to be a defensive stopper, honestly. Now, he hasn't been that up to this point. He's more of a defensive playmaker right now. But I think that if you teach him some discipline, you get him into a system that's going to preach discipline, Gary Trent Jr., I think, could be fantastic on that end of the floor. He knocks down shots multiple times in his career. He's averaged 18 points a game or better. I think GTJ is going to be a very coveted player this offseason. He's on a player option right now. He's definitely opting out of it. Oh, and by the way, he's still really young. I believe he's either 24 or 25 years old the day I record this. I know he'll be 25 next season. So Gary Trent Jr., a really nice addition, really nice player for a team that whoever gets him, I think Toronto should consider keeping him. Between a player that we're going to talk about a little bit later on for Toronto and Gary Trent Jr., I'd prefer for them to keep Gary Trent and build a different way, but we'll see when we get there. And here we are, Fred VanVleet, my 6th best free agent. The one reason why he's not a little bit higher, now his track record suggests maybe he should be a top 5 free agent this offseason, but for me, smaller guards, when they age, they just age not gracefully sometimes. Kind of look at Kyle Lowry's last couple of years in Miami. I know right now recency bias will suggest, oh, Kyle Lowry's a home run player for Miami. I mean, the last couple of regular seasons have been really rough for Kyle Lowry, to be honest. Now, I'm not saying that Fred VanVleet's going to follow the same path. He's not quite as old as Lowry is either, but just realistically, you get Fred VanVleet on a 4-year deal. By the end of that, he might be a little bit aged out. But with where he currently is, he's a good deep range shot maker. He's a really good defender for his size, which I think is one thing most people are surprised about. You look at him kind of on paper and you'd say, well, a 6'1" guard is going to be kind of hard to defend. He does a good job. He uses his size and leverage pretty well to impact players on the defensive end of the court. And I think that VanVleet, if there's going to be a team that's going to sign him, he's going to have a really strong market. I actually really do believe, because I think the Houston Rockets would consider it if James Harden went back to Philadelphia. I think the 76ers would be interested in VanVleet if Harden goes to Houston. I think the Phoenix Suns would be very interested in a Fred VanVleet sign and trade centered around Chris Paul and some other stuff going back to the Toronto Raptors. And I also think that the dark horse team, the team that has the money to just go out and sign him, the Orlando Magic, would have interest in Fred VanVleet. I know Magic fans think that, oh, we have Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony, we don't really need Fred VanVleet. I think VanVleet is an upgrade on their current roster. Now, is he an upgrade for 3 years from now? Possibly not. I still think Jalen Suggs could give you something. But realistically, the Raptors at this spot, they're in danger of losing both VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. If that happens, it's going to be like a real kind of reset moment for Toronto. I think that there's going to be some trades that they consider this offseason, centered around OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam as well. And I think Fred VanVleet is a player that, if he does start in free agency, my guess right now is either Phoenix or Orlando, either via cap space or sign and trade for the Phoenix Suns in that situation. Number 5, Kyle Kuzma of the Washington Wizards. Kuzma, a little bit younger than a guy like Fred VanVleet, of course, and for me, that's the reason why he would be here 5th on this list. I think his future's maybe a little bit brighter than what we've seen from Fred VanVleet. He did average over 20 points a game this year, although, again, with Kuzma, I'm not sure if that's going to be a thing that would stick up on a team that's going to be, maybe the 4th seed in the conference. Kyle Kuzma, to me, is probably like a 17, 18 point per game scorer on a very good team, which is good. That's why he's the 5th best free agent this offseason in my eyes right now. I think his rebounding is a significant area that could help teams, because he rebounds the ball very, very well as a wing. Not quite to a Josh Hart level, but pretty darn close, honestly. He's got good length. I think he's progressed immensely as a defender from the beginning of his career to where he's currently at. I think it's a remarkable transformation. I think his playmaking is coming along as well. Now, there's still a little bit of that where he's kind of reliant on tough shot making, and sometimes that's not the most efficient way to play the game. But when you need a bucket, Kyle Kuzma can occasionally give you one. And because of that, I think that there's going to be a lot of interest for Kyle Kuzma around the league. I feel bad for the Washington's front office, whoever ends up taking that president role, because there's going to be not one, but 2 really tough decisions to make immediately upon becoming the GM and president of the team. Because not only do you have to decide what you're doing with Kyle Kuzma, you also have to decide what you're doing with Kristaps Porzingis. And I think it's a realistic possibility that Washington overpays one or both of them. Porzingis is a max level player in my eyes, to be honest. Now, I don't think he'll sign on the max, but I think with what he provides to a team, if you play him at center, he can be a max level contributor. You look at his defensive splits this year and some of the metrics around his rim protection. He was one of the best rim defenders in the entire league this year, and that's what you'd expect from a 7'3" guy. I never understood why Dallas consistently stuck to him playing power forward. I just thought that was a nightmare, and Porzingis needs to play center. And I know that's going to put a physical toll on his body. I think it's good to spell him with another center, and at times maybe you can play him as the 4, but he should start as a center. And I think Washington, with Daniel Gafford and him, they have 2 really good rim protectors. They were the only team in the league, actually, if I'm not mistaken on this. They might have been one of 2 teams in the league that had 2 guys in the top 10 in blocks this entire season, which is a massive indicator that not only was Porzingis protecting the rim, but Daniel Gafford was as well. And I think Washington, to me, what I would prefer is working out some high-level sign-and trade around Kuzma, and maybe even a sign-and trade around Porzingis to bring in assets and just kind of reset the cards there in Washington. But if I were to want to keep one of them, I would prefer keeping Porzingis, because I think he's an easier player to build around, because he at least brings one really, really high-end skill, which is rim protection. And he can also shoot the ball as a big man, so it gives you some flexibility with what type of power forward, what type of small forward you bring in. It gives you a lot of options out there. Whereas Kuzma, I think if you're committing to a wing, yes, you can put other things around him too, but it doesn't give you like that one high end, oh, he's the best in the league at this, or he's one of the best in the league at this. It's not like his rim protection's there. It's not like he's one of the best perimeter defenders. So I think building around Porzingis would be a little bit easier, but really Washington's in a tough spot because they have to decide on Porzingis, they have to decide on Kuzma, and then they also have Beal's contract, which is an absolute Goliath of a deal that I think is going to be one of the worst deals in the NBA, and I think a lot of people are starting to open their eyes to that more and more and more and more. 2 years from now, that's going to be the main topic of NBA discussion is, holy cow, how is Bradley Beal making this much money? Just remember, I told you guys this first. I've been talking about it for a year and a half now on the channel, basically since he signed that contract. And even before he signed the contract, I talked about the potential of that being just a terrible deal for Washington. The Wizards are in a tough spot. Honestly, losing Porzingis and Kuzma feels like a disaster, but it might actually be the best thing for them long term because they'd probably bottom out and then maybe get a top pick or two and kind of reset the cards for the team. Third, I have Draymond Green here, and this is a multiple-time NBA champion, a guy who multiple-time All-Defense, Defensive Player of the Year in the past, probably one of the most polarizing players in NBA history as well, I would argue. Some people think Draymond Green is absolutely terrible. Some people think Draymond Green is an absolutely insane, incredible player. And some people, like myself, think he's a fantastic player, one of the smartest players in the NBA, but he has serious skill set deficiencies that limit him from ever being like a superstar, right? Because if he had the better skill set, he would be a superstar with how smart of a player he is, how good of a passer he is. He just doesn't score the ball very well. And because of that, there's some issues. First of all, he knows he doesn't score the ball very well, which is usually the first problem. That's the difference between a guy like him and Dillon Brooks. To begin the fact, Dillon Brooks thinks he scores the ball well. Draymond Green knows that he doesn't, and it really opens up his game to play the way that he's supposed to play. The one issue I see with Draymond Green, though, is there's teams around the league that I think would have interest in signing him because of the ability he has defensively, because of how smart he is, because of his playmaking. But I think his scoring deficiencies would be more catastrophic on other teams. I think at times this postseason we saw for the Warriors, his inability to make layups in traffic was a problem for them. His unwillingness to shoot the ball at times was problematic. Now, a lot of the time it works out pretty well because it turns into grenade dribble handoffs with Steph and Clay, and he generates a lot of open looks. His backdoor passing is incredible, and to me, again, he's the third best free agent this offseason in my eyes. I think Draymond Green is unbelievably good at basketball. He is so smart. He really understands the game. He knows his strengths. He knows his weaknesses. He knows his team strengths. He knows the other team's weaknesses. He knows the other team's strengths. He does everything right, essentially, in terms of his brain and operating in the game. And that is, in my opinion, the most important thing in basketball is if you have guys who know what they're supposed to do and know how to do it. The issue is Draymond Green just doesn't finish some plays that he needs to finish. And I think, the Kings, very smartly, Mike Brown did a great job. They just doubled Steph on their high pick and roll, had Draymond Green catch the ball in the short roll, and instead of stepping up on him, giving them that kind of patented Golden State Warriors backside lob off the pick and roll that they've always hit, and it just seemingly works every single time. Mike Brown, who used to coach for the Warriors, knew that was coming and said, no, Sabonis, you're not actually going to step out on Draymond. We're going to let Draymond Green shoot 12-foot floaters and 8-foot floaters, and they're going to be open, and we'll see if he can make them. And Draymond Green never really started to make them, and that's part of why that series went 7 games. I think Draymond Green to a bunch of teams would add a lot of value, especially defensively, and the type of character that he has in terms of getting other people to try their hardest defensively. I think he's a big culture setter, both in a good way and a bad way. That Jordan Poole incident, of course, really, I believe, negatively impacted Golden State this season. I think it had huge implications on their season. Draymond Green himself has admitted to that. I think it was a big learning moment for Draymond Green. I'm not expecting him to act that way again in the future, but there is positive elements as well to the way that he's established culture and really willed his team to winning a lot of games. Draymond Green's fantastic. I just think, there's teams around the league that he would work, teams that he wouldn't work on. I think Golden State would like to keep him, but there's also big questions right now about Bob Myers. Will he even be back in Golden State? Reportedly, he has a massive offer from them, basically a record-breaking offer for a president of basketball operations. We'll see if he actually takes that or not, but I think his return is going to really impact if Draymond's back in the Bay or not. Number 2, Kyrie Irving of the Dallas Mavericks. That's right, my Dallas Mavericks, who traded for Kyrie Irving. I knew that was going to be a disaster the moment that they traded for him. And there was actually a report out today from The Athletic that Kyrie Irving could potentially already have a handshake, wink, wink agreement done with the Dallas Mavericks on a $200 million deal, which was one of my worst nightmares about them making this trade, is that we were going to commit to Kyrie Irving long term, and then you really don't know what you're going to get from him on a night-to-night, year-to-year basis. It's just, Kyrie Irving is fantastically talented. He's one of the best players in the NBA skill set wise. He's one of the top ball handlers in the league. He's one of the top shot makers in the league, both inside the arc and outside of the arc. Kyrie Irving is an unbelievable basketball talent, but there have been significant off-court issues that have really impacted his ability to go out there and perform night to night. There's been issues about him fitting in with teams, and I think sometimes the way he answers questions is interesting as well, kind of throwing teammates under the bus at certain points in his time in Brooklyn specifically. I think Kyrie is going to stay in Dallas. But I do think there is some flight risk to both Phoenix and the Los Angeles Lakers. The Suns, like I mentioned earlier with Fred VanVleet, the reason that they make sense is Kyrie Irving is an upgrade over Chris Paul at this point of their careers. Now, Kyrie, less dependable than Chris Paul throughout the regular season, but probably more dependable in the postseason because Chris Paul just constantly gets hurt year in, year out. It's just every single playoffs, it seems like there's something with him. And Phoenix is going to look into this. I 100% promise you they will. The Lakers are going to strongly consider Kyrie Irving based on the way that D'Angelo Russell has played in the Western Conference Finals. Kyrie Irving is a guy that makes sense for the Lakers to look into. And the Mavericks, are they going to facilitate some type of sign and trade around D'Angelo Russell and Malik Beasley? I hope not. If they do, then it's a really terrible situation for Dallas. I think Kyrie Irving stays with the Mavericks, though. That's my current prediction. That's where I'm at with him right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if in a week I'm saying something completely different, because with Kyrie Irving, you just never really know. Remember, the Nets were on a huge winning streak, basically. Then Kevin Durant gets injured, and then Kyrie Irving requests a trade. And who would have known that Kevin Durant, when he got injured in their huge winning streak, that was going to be the last game that he played with Kyrie Irving on the Brooklyn Nets. It's just, that's the way Kyrie is. That's the way Kyrie acts, and it's going to really shake up free agency this year, which leads me to my number 1 free agent, James Harden of the Philadelphia 76ers. I almost said of the Houston Rockets, because that's where I expect him to play next season. I think a return to H-Town is in order. I would be surprised if he's not a Houston Rocket next season. And really my rationale for that is, one, the Rockets have money. Secondly, Tillman Fertitta, their owner, wants to win. Rafael Stone knows he has pressure on him to win, and there's nothing better than bringing back a guy that the fans love in James Harden. And I know people are going to say, well, this doesn't make any sense. Bill Simmons is just screaming and crying all the time on Twitter about why would the Rockets sign James? Because James Harden has never missed the playoffs. The Rockets, since trading James Harden, have been literally the worst team in the league. Like, you could really make an argument that over the last 3 years, there's not been a team worse than the Houston Rockets, and their record basically backs that up as well. The Rockets have been brutal since their decision to trade James Harden. I told everybody that that would happen, and yes, they did bring in some young talent. That young talent hasn't won anything yet. James Harden is the best playmaker in the league, arguably. He led the league in assists this year, okay? He was a fantastic passer for Joel Embiid. He's part of the reason why Joel Embiid won MVP. When James Harden first got traded to Brooklyn, he became the point guard of the Brooklyn Nets and really facilitated the offense for everybody around him there. That's why Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and Harden would have won a title if they stayed healthy in Brooklyn. Houston, it's not about winning a title. You're not going to win a title if you sign James Harden to a 4-year deal. I just don't think you will. But James Harden is going to elevate the floor of this team so significantly. It's going to be insane. And if you want to know why they should do this, go look at Jabari Smith this past season and kind of the expectations on him based on how he actually played. That's the result of playing with guards who can't play make for others. Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green just don't do that. This puts everyone in the role that they should be. James Harden should have the ball in his hands. Jalen Green should be like a slicer off of the wing, kind of playing in a Tyrese Maxey role. I think he's got better shot-making capabilities than Maxey, though, long-term. Not that he's better at it right now, but I think Jalen Green could potentially become better at it. And I think James Harden is going to empower Jalen Green in a very similar way to what we've seen with Tyrese Maxey and his growth in the last year and a half while playing alongside James Harden in terms of statistical output and scoring efficiency. I think Harden's going to help Jalen Green stop turning over the basketball because Harden himself will have the ball in his hands. Kevin Porter Jr. becomes your natural sixth man, which is what he should be. And I think Jabari Smith becomes really the big winner here because he's going to have somebody who can create and just facilitate an offense, draw attention, and then Jabari Smith's just going to shoot more open shots than he did this past year, which I think is really vital, not only for him, but for the Houston Rockets. Harden's going to help them see development in their young guys. He's going to help them be in more competitive games, win more games, and maybe even get some playoff experience, which is what I would bet on with Ime Udoka as the coach as well, that the Houston Rockets, if they land James Harden, they draft well in the draft, and they with Ime Udoka and Harden and the draft picks and some internal progression, I think the Rockets could be a playoff team next year. I really 100% do believe that, and I think James Harden, I think he vindicated this year why he's a good player. He should have been an all-star, led the league in assists. To me, he's the best free agent available in terms of the next 2 to 3 years of impact. I think James Harden's going to impact his team more than any other player on this list. Thank you all so much for watching. Just a reminder, we do have a Discord now. The link is in the description for that. Also, go follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Links are in the description for those as well. Really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, this has been my top 20 free agents this offseason. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.